Hi! Are you a game developer working on a hot new game? Looking for ways to make sure your passion project hits the mark instead of being 90% off on Steam after 2 weeks? And are you wanting that advice to come from some random dude on the internet with no formal training or experience in the field? Then boy oh boy are you in the right place. Also, beware spoilers for this stuff. Most people will tell you the most important part of a story is the ending, because that's what people remember. But not me. Personally, I feel like the most important thing to make sure you get right is the intro. It sets the mood for the entire story, and if done right, will make sure people actually stick around long enough to get to the disappointing ending. One of the best intros I've seen in the past few years is in A Plague Tale: Innocence. In it, you go out on a hike with your father and the loyal family dog. Along the way, you learn the basics of the game, but you also get a sense for the characters. Eventually, your jaunt through the woods becomes a hunting trip as you approach a wild pig, which realizes you're there and runs away. So you and your dog give chase. Eventually, you get separated, and when you finally catch up, this happens.
My dog. Who did this?
Devilry is this?
What makes this such a compelling intro is that it sets the tone for the game. Ultimately, the dog doesn't play any sort of role in the story, but opening your game with such a dramatic display tells the player that this game isn't messing around. Anything can happen, and very well may. Another game that has a lesson for us to learn is Rage 2. And believe me, I'm as shocked as anyone to find Rage 2 doing something right when it comes to the story. But here we are. At the beginning of the game, an alarm goes off. Someone runs in yelling about something, you grab a gun, and are off to the races. There's no warm-up period. You get your power armor from a soldier who gets killed in the battle, and learn to use it on the fly. What's great about this is that it just jumps straight into the action, where some games would have some opening bit where someone instructs you to put on the armor, gives you a quick rundown on its abilities and how to use them, etc. Rage 2 doesn't beat around the bush. You turn it on and it's go time. This serves to keep players engaged no matter the skill level. Is this your first FPS? Well, the first level is actually a serviceable tutorial. FPS veteran? Well, then you don't have time to get bored slogging your way through a press A to jump for the 500th time with nothing going on to keep your interest. But probably the single best opening in modern gaming is in God of War. It opens with Kratos cutting down a tree and one arm carrying it like a total Chad back to the boat. Eventually they get back to the house where you realize that they've been preparing a funeral for their wife and mother. After disposing of the body and paying their respects, they head out in the direction of Deer. Things get a little crazy though, and Kratos is forced to brutally massacre so many things. Once the world's most dangerous hunting trip is over and they've achieved their prize, Kratos gets one last chance to demonstrate the absolute limitless power of pure rage. Once back home, he gets a knock at the door, and this happens.
You would not listen.
Fine. My turn.
What makes this intro so amazing is that it not only teaches you how to play the game, but it also gives you a deep look into who these characters are. We learn that Kratos is a powerful warrior with very poor people skills and an anger problem, that Atreus desperately wants to please his father but feels he may never actually achieve that goal, and that the villain is someone who may even be more powerful and dangerous than Kratos. It tells you everything you need to know to be completely hooked, while still leaving so much room for intrigue. Now, once you've nailed the intro and have the player hooked, you still need to keep them that way. Most games are over 20 hours long, and it's very hard, especially with how short our attention spans are nowadays, to keep people interested in just about anything for that long. So how do you make your game one that players will look forward to playing at any given chance, instead of one that they only play because they feel they owe it to their wallets to finish? Well, probably the most important thing you can do is establish an emotional connection between player and character, which is no easy task, but certainly not impossible. If you haven't guessed, I'm currently playing God of War on PC right now, so I'm going to use it as my example fairly often, which is good because it's an excellent game and a perfect example of being realistic. You see, when it comes to characters, being realistic doesn't mean you put them in situations a real person would be in. It means you have them react realistically to the crazy situations they're in. Take this moment in God of War where Atreus is forced to kill another actual human for the first time.
Boy? Close your heart to it.
His reaction to that is how I would imagine most people reacting. Sure, it was necessary. Sure, they were bad people. But that doesn't change the fact that you've now taken a life. It would have been so easy to just have him jump straight back into his old ways, jogging around the room, going where he's told, doing what he does. But God of War goes the extra mile to make sure these characters feel real. That sense of realness is what helps the player identify with them, and helps them feel like they care about them. Because of these little details of character, you aren't playing the game because you want to get all the trophies, or even just to see what happens next. You actually want to help them complete their quest because it's important to them, and they are important to you. Another important thing in any story, but especially a video game, is to keep it simple. Telling a smaller story means you don't have to commit as much time to it, and therefore have more time to develop your characters and their relationships along the way. Today I heard someone say, people won't remember your plot, they'll remember your characters. Take the original Star Wars, for example. It's an extremely simple plot. Bad army has super weapon, good guys destroy super weapon. Not a lot of moving parts there. But because there's so few moving parts, each one gets a lot of extra attention. Like this famous scene in the Millennium Falcon on their way to Alderaan. The only part of this scene we actually need to see for plot purposes is this.
Well, you can forget your troubles with those Imperial slugs. I told you I'd outrun them.
But because the rest of the scene didn't end up being cut for time, we also get to learn that Han is a skeptic.
Kid, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything. There's no mystical energy field controls my destiny. It's all a lot of simple tricks and nonsense.
Luke's training is coming along nicely. R2 is good at video games. Chewie has an anger problem.
Let him have it. It's not wise to upset a Wookiee.
But sir, nobody worries about upsetting a droid.
That's because a droid don't pull people's arms out of their sockets when they lose. Wookiees are known to do that.
And Obi-Wan ate Chipotle before leaving Mos Eisley.
Are you alright?
I feel something terrible has happened.
The point is that because George Lucas was willing to tell a simpler story, we got some of the best characters ever put on screen. Probably the biggest pitfall in character development, though, and one that absolutely will drag down the motivation to keep playing, is when everything the character does, they do for other people. Your character needs to have their own goals and dreams. Take Kena Bridge of Spirits, for example, a game which I didn't finish, by the way. One of the biggest problems I had with the game is that I couldn't connect to Kena. And I think the biggest problem I had with her is that she isn't even really a character. They tried to give her a personality. She's not a silent protagonist. She's actually pretty well voice acted. The problem is that after playing about 2/3 of the game, I honestly couldn't figure out what she even wanted. Everything she did and everything she hoped to do was in service of other characters. Going back to God of War for a second, I know. but he'll do things for other people. Pretty regularly even. But I always know what his goal is. Go to a high place and throw his wife's burned body down on any unsuspecting residents below. And because I know that's what he wants, and I know it'll probably be hilarious, I'm more than happy to help out the dwarves or the spirits or whoever along the way. But in a game like Cana, where that overarching goal doesn't exist, the character just feels empty. I almost feel like she's more of an NPC than the actual NPCs. After characters, the next best way to keep people from getting bored is world building. You want your world to feel lived in. You need to have a rich enough lore to make it feel as though the world existed before the player actually started playing, and that it continues even after the player turns it off. But at the same time, you can't run the risk of the lore being so complex that the player can't keep up, or just like with the plot, becoming so time-consuming that the characters don't get the attention they need to fully develop. The game that in my estimation has the best world building ever is Bioshock. Set in an underwater city with a classic Art Deco aesthetic, infested with drug-addicted lunatics and patrolled by old-timey scuba diving golems. The setting alone is enough to keep even the most casual player interested for the runtime. But if a player decides they absolutely must know more about what happened there, the game has the richest lore this side of Elder Scrolls. The genius of it all is that most of the story is told through audio logs you find throughout the game, so the player can decide for themselves how much backstory is the proper amount to keep them interested without getting overwhelmed or burnt out. Another aspect of the setting that more games should focus on is keeping your map small enough to not require fast traveling, while remaining large enough to not feel cramped. My favorite map right now is in, you guessed it, God of War. Breaking the map up into various realms was absolutely genius by the developers. It allows each area to feel large enough to explore while small enough to navigate normally. This allows the characters to tell each other stories, argue about what just happened, or do a number of other things that aren't relevant to the plot but go a long way toward character development. While a game like Skyrim is so large that only the most hardcore of players would ever play without fast travel, leading the devs to not even try to add in the extra dialogue and quirks found in more character-focused games. So finally we get to story, the third and least important aspect of how addictive your game will be. You see, story, especially in a game, is the least important aspect because it's the one the player will focus on the least. We'll spend 100% of the game with the character, 100% in the world, and about 80% in the various gameplay loops, but only about 20% on the story. The only thing the story needs to do is give a legitimate reason for the player to keep moving his more interesting character through the more interesting world. The one thing I will warn you about, though, is stopping the story in the middle to reset everything. Going back to Cana again, this was a huge reason I lost interest in the game. You see, when you first start the game, you meet these two adorable childs, and they explain that they've lost their big brother and need your help to find him. Over the course of too many hours for me to feel comfortable admitting on the overjudgmental internet, you actually start to care about the kids, and finding their brother is a goal you are invested in. Then you do. They reunite, and your level of cheek tier lets you know if you're a normal person or a sociopath. But then that's it. The game opens a new area to you, and you're introduced to a new character seeking to be reunited with another new character, and I'm left wondering if the game actually expects me to care enough about these new characters to keep playing. As I stated earlier, if Cana had her own personal goal in the game, or if they'd introduced this new character earlier, I might have been more interested. But as it stands, it almost felt like it was supposed to be a DLC released later in the year to draw people back to the game for a new adventure, rather than an actual part of the game proper. Just a couple of side notes for you. Subversion can be a powerful storytelling device when used sparingly. When Bruce Willis was dead at the end of Sixth Sense, it was a powerful moment that caught a lot of people off guard and left them feeling like they'd just watched a very good movie. But the reason it worked so well was because everything else in the movie was pretty much what you expected. So since you felt like you were watching a cookie-cutter ghost movie, you were caught completely off guard by the twist of the decade at the end. But Subversion can also kill your story if you overuse it. Take The Last Jedi, for example. If Rian Johnson had only thrown in one surprise, it might have landed. But when you are bombarded by Luke throws his lightsaber, Rey's parents are nobody, they killed Snoke, there's an entire planet dedicated to being the set of a James Bond film, and so on, eventually it just gets boring and the audience hates it. There is room to be creative with your story, but you still have to give the audience what they're expecting most of the time, or else they're just going to hate what they're seeing. And also, use QuickTime events, but use them sparingly. The latest trend in gaming is to remove most of the cutscenes with scenes of walking, during which story is told. But you can't just have your player holding forward on the controller and expect them to be okay with it. It's boring. So what you can do to make sure they are engaged instead of using a rubber band to keep the thumbstick in the up position while they go to the bathroom and grab a snack, is to throw in the occasional QuickTime event. Look, a crevice in the wall. Press B to turn to the side and continue walking forward. Believe it or not, when done correctly, you can actually trick the player into thinking that counts as gameplay. Other techniques include placing some side rooms for them to explore, puzzles to solve, or the occasional ambush from a handful of enemies. Anything to keep them focused on the game, while not being so overdone that it's annoying. So thanks for listening and watching, hope you enjoyed the video. Bye.